Welcome, it is Mitch. I'm on YouTube. If you haven't already, please click the subscribe button as we try to build this thing up. The goal is 1,000 subscribers by the end of the Packers season. There's a lot of angles being covered with the Micah Parsons trade. We'll have many videos this week previewing week 1 against Detroit, looking at the matchup, recent history, things of that nature. What has changed with Detroit in the offseason? What has changed with Green Bay in the offseason? What has remained the same with both teams as well? I just wanted to touch base on, I feel like, an important angle of this Micah Parsons trade that I have not seen discussed at all. I haven't seen it brought up once, and I'm not, combing through every single Packers outlet, whether it be articles, video, content creation, whatever it is. It is an angle that I think deserves some attention, and I just haven't seen it brought to the forefront, really. And I'm sure I'm missing a couple of people or a couple of articles where maybe it was mentioned or it was a footnote, but I think it really played more of an indirect key role in this trade going down than what we may initially believe. You look at the Packers and you look at the Cowboys. This is a seismic trade. This is a trade that sent shockwaves throughout the NFL. You trade Micah Parsons, prime of his career, entering the peak of his powers. You make him the highest non-paid quarterback in NFL history. He's a blue chipper. There aren't many of those in the NFL. You talk about the most important positions in the National Football League. It's quarterback, protecting the quarterback, and getting to the quarterback. And the Packers just got one of the best in the business, again, entering the prime of his career at getting to the quarterback. And you look at the two teams involved, it's the Dallas Cowboys and, of course, the Green Bay Packers. And when you think about what team out of those two is more likely to make a move that sends a shockwave through the NFL, it's Jerry Jones and the Dallas Cowboys. You don't see players like Micah Parsons typically get traded, right? This is not an annual occurrence. This is not even an every 2 or 3 year thing. Like, a player like Micah Parsons typically does not get traded. However, when you talk about organizations that would be involved in such a deal, whether it's acquiring or sending off, it's more likely that Jerry Jones and Dallas are going to be involved in a trade where you're like, what the hell just happened, than the Green Bay Packers. Like, you look at Green Bay, you've had 2 head coaches since 2006. You've had 2 team presidents since 2008. You've had 2 general managers since 2005. Again, you've had 2 head coaches, not counting the Joe Philbin interim basis when Mike McCarthy was fired back in 2018, 2019. So you've had 2 full-time head coaches since 2006, 2 team presidents since 2008, and 2 general managers since 2005. It's status quo in Green Bay. It's a model of consistency. It's draft develop, keep our own guys in-house, things of that nature. This trade was surprising for a lot of reasons. And indirectly, and we'll get into this, Ed Policy, your new team president, played a very big indirect role. I promise you he did. The trade of Micah Parsons, I wonder if it comes together, if Green Bay pushes for it, if not for some things that were reported and some things that Ed Policy had said on the record directly earlier in the summer, specifically back in June. Now, I think if you took a league-wide poll, and then you took a poll amongst the fan base, there aren't many that would peg head coach Matt LaFleur or general manager Brian Gutekunst as being on the hot seat, right? When you talk about, like, hey, what coaches are on the hot seat? Who's the most likely to lose their job during the season, after the season? What about general managers? I don't think LaFleur and Gudy, qualify for that, right? I don't think it's viewed that way. LaFleur's entering his 7th season as the head coach in Green Bay. They've made the playoffs 5 of his first 6. They have 2 NFC championship appearances. I know everyone wants more and more, but it's a really good, strong resume for Matt LaFleur so far. Gudy has made some really stout free agent signings. You look back at the impact the first couple of years that Darius Smith had when he was signed, Preston Smith as well, throughout a longer tenure with Green Bay. You look at, scooping up Rasul Douglas off Arizona's practice squad and what he developed into, what Devondre Campbell was for that one really good year in Green Bay. You look at some draft picks and the boldness of them taking Jordan Love in 2020 when a lot of people wanted wide receiver, and then taking a wide receiver this past April and Matthew Golden in the first round when Green Bay hadn't done so since 2003, talking about a wideout going in round 1 to the Packers. And so it's hard to envision either like being on the hot seat entering this season, yet Ed Policy, and he definitely had like a direct role in this. We just don't know to what degree, right? Like Ed Policy was not kept in the dark, was not, naive to the conversations that were going on. Like, obviously he was aware. We just don't know what sort of direct influential role he had in this trade going down. We all obviously look at Gudy as the general manager for when these types of moves are made. But back in June, Ed Policy was asked about the contracts of LaFleur and Gudy. Now, they entering this year both only have 2 years remaining on their current deals. So they would be set to expire at the end of the 2026-2027 season a year from now. And Ed Policy was asked about their current deals, and he didn't make any commitment to either guy, LaFleur or Gudy, long term when asked about extensions. And he didn't do that, this offseason by offering them extensions, which isn't out of the ordinary. But I thought his comments were very interesting. This is Ed Policy back in June. He said, and I quote, "We'll do whatever it takes to win football games. If that means changing the structure, then we'll change the structure. Just like Mark," and he's talking about Mark Murphy, "just like Mark was not wedded to the structure that he inherited when he came in, I would say I'm not wedded to the structure. We'll do whatever is best for the Packers." Now, that might sound pretty routine boilerplate for many of you. To me, again, you have to look at the Packers. They are very, very different with how the organization is run, with how the franchise is run compared to every other NFL franchise, right? Owned by the people, not a person, not a Jerry Jones, right? There's just so many things that make the Packers unique in their structure and how the franchise goes about business. In like I mentioned, the continuity of having, 2 head coaches since 2006, 2 team presidents since 2008, 2 GMs since 2005. But you have to remember, in the normal scope of things, NBA, MLB, NFL, NHL, your major sports, when a new team president comes in, when a new CEO comes in, they are not married to the regime that is in place when they take over. We see this a lot with other teams in a variety of different sports. A team president will come in and he wants to make his stamp. He wants to put his mark on his tenure early on. And that means bringing in his own coach, his own GM, his own staff, things of that nature. Because when you look at the food chain, Ed Policy, team president, CEO, he can make that decision. He's ahead on the totem pole of Gudy, of Matt LaFleur. And they fall below him in the ranking, right? They just do. That's how it works. And we see in a lot of these cases that when a new team president, CEO, is brought in, they want to push their own buttons with their own guys, have their own regime. Now, where it doesn't seem like it would make a lot of sense is you look at the Packers, and they aren't in a bad spot by any stretch of the imagination. Again, 5 of the 6 years have gone to the playoffs under LaFleur, 2 NFC Championship appearances. I know we want more. We want Super Bowls. We want Lombardi Trophy coming back to Titletown. Only 1 out of the 32 teams every year gets to claim that, right? Only 1 out of the 32 goes home truly, truly happy when the curtains get pulled down on an NFL season in February. But the Packers are good. Like, it feels like they're on solid ground with Matt LaFleur as the head coach and with Gudy as the GM. But it does not change. It does not negate the fact that a lot of people in Ed Policy's shoes will point out, like he did, I am not wedded to this structure that I inherited. Those were his words. I would say I'm not wedded to the structure. We'll do whatever is best for the Packers. And so you're thinking like, man, would he really get rid of LaFleur and or Gudy just to bring in his own guys? And again, this happens more frequently than you would think, but typically it can be a head honcho taking over a franchise that isn't on solid ground, that doesn't have a strong base, like Green Bay does. And so that's where this gets a bit trickier. Now, the interesting part of this, and where the Micah Parsons trade factors in, LaFleur and Gudy both have 2 years left on their contract. When Ed Policy was asked about sort of like a lame duck coach, right, or a lame duck GM, meaning entering the final year of their current contract with no clarity, with no extension in place, with no, hey, we're for sure going to get something worked out, or hey, we don't know, let's just see how it goes. Ed Policy heavily opposes putting a coach or putting a GM in that lame duck category, in that lame duck territory. He was asked about that specifically, and he said, and I quote, when asked about a coach or a GM potentially entering the final year of their contract with no clarity, Policy said, again back in June, and I quote, I'm generally opposed. I'd never say never, but I'm generally opposed to a coach or a GM going into the last year of their contract. That creates a lot of issues. I think normally you have a pretty good idea of where that relationship is going when you have 2 years left. Not always, but normally. So policy made no promises about extensions going to LaFleur or Gudy. They both have 2 years left on their current deals. He's also against a coach or a GM going into the final year of their deal with no clarity. You add all that up, and it sounds like there's a hell of a lot of pressure on LaFleur and Gudy to deliver in 2025. Enter the Micah Parsons trade. Green Bay loves stockpiling up on draft picks. Green Bay loves draft and develop. Green Bay has had the youngest roster in the NFL for the third year in a row. They got even younger with this Micah Parsons trade. You get Parsons, who's 26. You send out Kenny Clark, who's soon to be 30 years old. So you got even younger, right? But the gist of this is you got a blue chipper. You made a big trade. You gave up 2 future first-round draft picks. This is Gudy pushing poker chips into the center of the table. And don't be foolish about this. Gudy knows what Ed Policy said back in June. Goody's well aware of that. This day and age of social media, he's in that same building. He knows what was said in June. And it was very, very fascinating. Ed Policy trying to balance the best of both worlds. I'm not going to give them an extension yet. I also don't like the lame duck situation. Well, they got 2 years left. That means, boom, right here, 2025, this is a big year. This is a prove-it year for both guys, perhaps. And it just sounds weird to frame it that way because of the successes the Packers have had. But this is Ed Policy. And no pun intended, these are his policies. New president in place for Mark Murphy. Says winning is the top priority. Doing what's best for the Packers is the top priority. Then, last week, before the Micah Parsons trade happens, you have Matt Schneidman of The Athletic, who he made such a gigantic report, and Schneidman typically isn't in the business of making those type of reports unless he's certain of his reporting. Schneidman went on the Pat McAfee show and said, and I quote, this is Matt Schneidman of The Athletic, who covers the Packers, I spoke to someone recently and was told policy is truly up in the air about the futures of Matt LaFleur and Brian Gutekunst. If the Packers don't make the playoffs this year, which I don't think happens, but it's a possibility, I could certainly see Matt LaFleur and Brian Gutekunst, and I don't think this is hyperbole, both getting fired after this year. He would like to make a decision one way or another after this season. I don't know why that report didn't get more attention. I don't know why what Ed Policy said back in June didn't get more attention. I think it's because we land in this comfort zone with the Packers where it's just like, man, it's crazy to think they'd get rid of LaFleur and Gudy based on what they have done so far since both came over to Green Bay, of course, at slightly different times, but when both came over to Green Bay. But again, look around the landscape of sports. This is where you have to really, really zoom back the microscope and look around. A person in Ed Policy's shoes, a lot of the time, unless you're in the middle of a dynasty, unless you're coming off a championship one, unless you feel like, man, we are right there on the doorstep and I'm not going to tinker with anything, you will see a lot of people in the shoes that Ed Policy is in make a change to the head coach, make a change to the general manager, make a change to the roster, the staff, I should say, the coaching staff elsewhere. It is not abnormal. It is abnormal in Green Bay, where you just have a model of consistency in place, where there's not a lot of coaching turnover, where there's never team president turnover, where there's never general manager turnover. But you have Ed Policy himself saying back in June, we'll do whatever it takes to win football games. If that means changing the structure, and you know what he means when he says that, then we'll change the structure. Just like Mark was not wedded to the structure he inherited when he came in, I would not say I'm wedded to the structure I have. We'll do whatever is best for the Packers. And then says, I'm generally opposed. I'd never say never, but I'm generally opposed to a coach or GM going into the last year of their contract. It creates a lot of issues. I think normally you have a pretty good idea of where that relationship is going in when you have 2 years left. Not always, but normally. And then Schneidman drops a nuke and says, I spoke to someone recently and was told policy is truly up in the air about the futures of Matt LaFleur and Brian Gutekunst. Again, circle back to the Parsons trade. Indirectly, that report, those quotes from policy on the record in an interview back in June, you know, it is human nature for that to be sitting in the back of Goody's mind. And we will never have these answers. If Gudy has ever asked, like, man, with what policy had said earlier in the offseason, what was being reported on, like, did you feel pressure to make this kind of move? Goody's not going to be like, yeah, you know, I had to do something. I was desperate, so we gave away 2 future first-round picks and Kenny Clark for Micah Parsons. Like, the good thing within all of this is nobody is looking at the Packers thinking, wow, they really reached. The Packers gave up the farm to bring in Micah Parsons. Most people, I would say, outside of Bears fans, because I've seen Bears fans say this is a move of desperation, somehow saying this means the Packers don't trust Jordan Love. Well, if they don't trust Jordan Love, they don't have the quarterback position solved. If you don't have the quarterback position solved, why would you trade for Micah Parsons, which is a win-now move? They're not on the field together at the same time. How does that, it doesn't equate. 99.999% of the people looked at this trade and came away thinking, how the hell did Dallas not get more? Did they shop around Micah Parsons? Was Kenny Clark, who's a great player, but was Kenny Clark and 2 future firsts really the best offer for Dallas? How was it not 3 firsts? How was it not 2 firsts, a third, and Kenny Clark, and another player, another impact player, or Lucas Van Ness, right? Like, there's an objective view of this where most people are like, how is this? How did the Cowboys not get more from Green Bay? So that's good going for Gudy. It wasn't like 3 future first, a third, a fourth, Van Ness, and Kenny Clark. Then you'd be like, yeah, you still got Micah Parsons, but holy crap, they gave up a lot. And then you factor in the financials with the contract, making him the highest paid non-quarterback in NFL history. Most people are looking at this like, dang, it only took 2 firsts and Kenny Clark to get Micah Parsons, who's 26. That's incredible. But deep down, if Gudy, in his heart of hearts, he's aware of those comments in June. He's aware of the reports that are circulating. I spoke to someone recently. I'm quoting Matt Schneidman again. I spoke to someone recently who was told policy is truly up in the air about the futures of Matt LaFleur and Brian Gutekunst. That's not, I kind of heard through the... No, I spoke to someone recently and was told this, A, B, and C. He is up in the air about their futures, which again just sounds... It sounds almost like wild and far-fetched and hard to wrap the mind around. But like the thought of LaFleur and Gudy being gone after this year. Policy is now at the top of the totem pole. He has said himself he's not forced to stick with the current structure, with the current regime. And Gudy had a lot of reasons to get the Parsons deal done. And one of them circulates around getting the Packers back to a Super Bowl. And again, it's impossible to think or suggest that Gudy isn't aware of what policy said in June or what Schneidman reported recently. He's aware of what is being said. And this Parsons trade, landing him in Green Bay, it was a lot of things. It was getting a top player in the NFL on your team in the prime of his career. It was a message being sent to the organization by Gudy that it is time to win now. It was, like I said, pushing a lot of those poker chips into the middle of the table. He's sitting on pocket aces. He sees the flop, but he hasn't seen the turn or the river yet, and he's like, I'm going to put a lot of chips in here. We're going to go get Micah Parsons. Policy's words, these reports played an indirect role in this deal getting done. I just don't know to what significance, to what degree. But we can't put the blinders on. We can't act dumb in these situations. The words are circulating. On record from Ed Policy, the reports are circulating. Whether you want to believe there should or shouldn't be pressure on Gudy or LaFleur, there is. There is. And with what Ed Policy said back in June, it sounds like playoffs are great. Not going to get it done in Green Bay. And from that perspective, I love it. Set the bar super high. You're the Green Bay freaking Packers, right? And in the Aaron Rodgers era, you somehow only won 1 Super Bowl. He only appeared in 1 Super Bowl. And there were many years, especially in the tail end of the Rodgers era, where people would have said, go get, T. Higgins in the first round. And then they drafted Jordan Love. Go trade for Odell Beckham Jr. And instead he gets traded to the Rams, and the Rams win the Super Bowl that year. This was still when Odell Beckham was producing. It's not Odell Beckham last year, 2 years ago, whatever. There were moves that people wanted to be made. And it just never came to fruition. And now this offseason, we just drafted a wide receiver in the first round, first time since Javon Walker 23 years ago. We just traded Micah Parsons. Micah Parsons, they don't get traded a whole hell of a lot. And when they do, we're typically not the team that's going to be doing that business because we love our draft picks and we have to give up 2 future first-round picks. This was stepping outside of the box. This was pushing poker chips in the middle of the table. This was sort of getting comfortable with the uncomfortable for Gudy. I think this trade pays off. I really do. It takes the Packers to another level. A really good defense under Jeff Hafley in year 1 now gets Micah Parsons. yeah, they're going to be even better, in my opinion. What he does has a domino effect on the entire defense. Get consistent pressure on the quarterback. It rushes their process, rushes their decision-making. You can have your secondary pin their ears back more, wait for a quarterback to make those more reckless decisions because of Micah Parsons is constantly getting home. Ed Policy's words said back in June played an indirect part in this. And again, we will never know to which degree, but they certainly did. And I think sometimes saying the quiet part out loud isn't the popular way to go about things. But I circled what Ed Policy said back in June. And I should clarify, I never expected Ed Policy to come out and say, I love LaFleur, I love Gudy, they're going to be around forever, let's go. Like, I never expected that. But I didn't also, on the flip side of that, expect him to say, hey, Mark Murphy was not wedded to the structure and the regime he inherited. I am not married to this regime that's here. I was like, that's interesting. And then when he's brought up like, hey, LaFleur and Gudy only have 2 years left on his contract, and he says, yeah, I'm generally opposed to a GM or a head coach going into the last year of their contract. It creates a lot of issues. And then Matt Schneidman says, yeah, he's up in the air, truly up in the air on both of them. All of that adds up to it playing some role in this deal getting done. Gudy saying, I need to probably make a big splash. If I am at some point in my tenure going to step into the box and take one big swing, this is probably the time to do it. You feel like you have a roster that already can compete. You feel like you have a roster that the NFC North is loaded, but we could win it. We could win the NFC North. That's what Goody's thinking is. And we just added Nate Hobbs, who we like. We just added Aaron Banks, who we like. Hopefully both are healthy, good to go for week one, right? Cross your fingers. You took Matthew Golden in the first round. I got a big boy up front for the future, more so in Anthony Belton. In the second round, Savion Williams, who, oh my gosh, gadget player galore. Matt LaFleur will have a ton of fun using him in the offense in the third round. Like, you made a lot of good moves, but you probably felt a little bit of pressure. Mark Murphy's gone, Ed Policy's in. Ed Policy said what he said in June, and Goody's like, let's just add the pieces together. If I'm going to take a big swing, now is the time. And he pounced. And again, nobody with a rational mind is looking at the trade the Packers made and saying, oh my gosh, they reached. Oh my God, they gave up so much. Everyone's like, how did that cost more? And so that's good for Gudy and sort of how he's being viewed or perceived, right? Most people aren't thinking this is a desperate move, and I wouldn't label it as a desperate move, but I would label it as Gudy knows what's being said. He went out and took a big swing, and what Ed Policy's words were back in June, what the report from Matt Schneidman was recently, probably played somewhat of a role in Gudy thinking, hey, I'm feeling this pressure a little bit. I'm going to go try to land a Micah Parsons. And he did, and it's great. Let me know what you guys and girls think. Again, I just haven't seen it reported on or talked about, and I know sometimes it's uncomfortable to say the quiet part out loud, and I think the quiet part here is go look at what Ed Policy said in June. Go look at what Matt Schneidman reported. It mattered. It carried weight indirectly in this Micah Parsons trade getting done. Mitch, I'm on YouTube. Please click the subscribe button if you haven't already. Next videos we'll have this week, we're going to do a full breakdown of the NFC North. We'll have Packers-Lions preview. A lot of things Packers-Lions content-wise, so please click the subscribe button. We want 1,000 by the end of the Packers season. We'll see you next time.